Good morning, and thank you for joining the Post-ish COVID-19 Recovery, a data-driven look at how retail has changed with Ethan Chernovsky, VP of Marketing at Placer AI. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the conversation, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today as we look to discuss the post-COVID-ish retail environment. I think the new norm is that there is no longer normal, and retailers and brands will need an agile and flexible approach to preparing really for an ever-changing consumer as we gear up for back to school and holiday. As we're seeing consumers start to kind of get back out and explore the kind of digital and physical world and how the two mesh together, and with their shifting priorities and really an openness to exploring different ways of shopping, consumer behavior has really been forever changed by the repercussions of the pandemic, or has it? We are thrilled to have Ethan Chernovsky here with us today to discuss what it all means. As you know, Placer AI has a phenomenal solution in terms of analyzing consumer behavior and traffic and trends. And so we want to accomplish 4 things today. Number 1, analyze top retail categories and brands to understand the retail recovery by sector and the strategies driving strength in this kind of new normal. Number 2, examine the recovery across regions and retail formats, malls, strip centers, outlet, etc. Number 3, break down changes versus stickiness in shopping behavior and what could they mean for retail moving forward. Once again, our eyes are towards back to school and holiday. And then number 4, looking at key customer shifts, such as the, kind of move to the suburbs and the potential impacts on retail. So before we get started, we'll be launching a poll and we'll address the results later in the conversation. So with that, Ethan, welcome, and let's kick things off.
It's always great to be here. I mean, I'll start with kind of the way we've always done it, with a quick intro into Placer, and then we'll kind of dive into the content. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Placer is a location data company. What that means is, people vote with their feet, and we're showing you how people vote every single day across the United States. So we observe a panel of 30 million devices. We use that panel to then run AI and machine learning algorithms on top of to make estimations on visit trends to any retail location. Critically, this is all aggregate anonymized data, so it is GDPR and CCPA compliant. And then we present that data in a wealth of different reports in our platform on everything from visit counts to trade areas, competitive benchmarking, traffic routes, customer journey, and a whole lot more. For anyone who is interested, on our website, we have a section called The Square at placer.ai-the Square. And it has a whole series of free tools that we are constantly upgrading and adding new ones to give people access to this data that we think is really critical to decision making.
I think that, Ethan, as we start to think about where the consumer is moving and kind of what kinds of malls are doing well, how do you think kind of this move out of kind of the, we think about the major metropolises, how is this changing how the consumer reacts? And is this kind of a, they're hearkening back to kind of some of the brands that they saw in the major cities, and now they're bringing those with them to the suburbs? What's happening, and why do you think it's happened so quickly?
I think there's a really significant trend when we talk about migration, and there's 2 elements to it. The first is that it's not this massive wholesale shift. It's not like half of the people in a city are leaving and going somewhere else. So it's really important to provide that context. But small shifts here do mean a lot, especially when you're talking about net change. So when we look at cities like, New York, what we're generally seeing is an older, slightly more affluent crowd moving out of the city and a younger crowd moving in, which could actually be really, really good for the city, both from a retail perspective and from a professional perspective. Because you think, that 35 to 40-year-old person with 2 children moving into the suburbs, the city is still remaining that center of orbit for them. And they're bringing this younger audience into the city, which could be really positive for retail. But the exciting element here is what's happening in these kind of growing regions. So everywhere from Raleigh, North Carolina to Austin, Texas, which is a city we've been talking about for a while now, places like Tampa Bay, that are seeing this net change, and people coming from major cities, whether it be Chicago, New York, and moving to there in what seems like a permanent shift. Like it's not changing, it's actually expanding over time. And that has huge retail implications for a few reasons. One, the people who are moving have the capacity to move, which is generally a very expensive thing to do. And they are going to places that are generally less costly. So if I'm leaving San Francisco to go to Raleigh, North Carolina, I have more expendable income. I have more money to spend. And that means really good things for retail. It also means really interesting things for companies that are looking to attract talent where it had been really expensive in like a major city area. And there are going to be really significant impacts on retail. One of the things we see in the slide is Starbucks rebounding really quickly in the cities that we see rebounding really quickly or see benefiting from that net change. And it's likely going to shift the way that many brands view their strategies, adapt their supply chain perspectives in order to meet these trends.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've heard of some very localized brands who have said that they're seeing demand in places that they don't have a physical presence and that they weren't even aware that the customer was aware of them. And so what we're seeing, right, is this opportunity for retailers who have had let's call it like a gateway city focus to really think about, first of all, domestic consumption. And secondly, as they do see this demand, where should they, and this is a question we're getting asked quite often, is where should they physically locate, right? Is it and it goes back to, I think, our next question, like, is it on mall? Is it off mall? Is it open air, right? What is kind of the correct, the right place for them? And will that change over time?
So, I mean, I think it's such an interesting question because it's this regionally, how should we set ourselves up? How do we set up where we can distribute our products effectively? But also this kind of, what type of format do I want to be in? And we saw this unique opportunity for outdoor centers, and everything we're seeing and hearing is that that's not necessarily going away. There's still a lot of buzz, and the fact that it's summer and the weather is nicer is clearly giving that some added value. But people found that they like some of these centers, and there's still a lot of demand to go into them. But at the same time, malls are also rebounding incredibly well. So we have this mall index that we track month over month, and it was down just 12.8% in May compared to 2019. And that's really impressive considering California was still largely shut down. New York was not fully reopened. And we are seeing this really tremendous recovery where top tier class A malls, or even higher, are rebounding really effectively. And there is this potential that they become even more valuable because of this suburban shift, people looking for an experience on a weekend, and the hub that they really create. It's possible that the stronger get even stronger, and that bottom tier of malls really starts to fall away.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think also too, what we're seeing is if you are, a retailer in a market and you have one store and you realize that, maybe you're in a BB plus mall and everyone's moving to the A mall, I think you're gonna like kind of pack up your goods and go, right? And that's exactly where I think the mind shift is. And then the other thing that we're seeing is, right, these landlords in these A malls, A minus B plus, that they're starting to think differently about how they incorporate some of the indie brands or up and coming brands and provide almost this like mall as a platform for them. So there's so much innovation that's taken place over the past 15, 16 months. I do think it changes the mall experience, not only what's there, but like why we go and maybe even how often we go.
I completely agree with you. And I think it's the most important thing to think about when we talk about malls. And it is maybe the light at the end of the tunnel for some of those B plus malls that are in that second tier, because if things start changing and we have a different conception of what belongs in a mall, all of a sudden they have this repositioning opportunity where they can redefine themselves. And also, I was in the Aventura Mall, granted pre-COVID, and you walked in, the entrance I walked in, there was a Tesla store right when you walked in. No street nearby, but this big Tesla store. And it's not something, at least if you would have asked anybody 10 years ago what belongs in a mall, no one would have ever said it's a car dealership. Yet that's happening. And there are a lot of really interesting things that are changing, which means that some things that had classically been in these top tier malls may look to find new types of homes that they can anchor or build a unique experience around. And that could be the lifeline that some of these, that B plus B mall needed to find a new path forward.
I think we're also seeing the desire to keep the customer longer, right? Because then they can shop more, kind of stores. And, there's, if you think about some of the services that are needed, maybe it's a drugstore, certainly more F&B. I think in the US as a whole, we're at like 11-12% F&B penetration in malls. And that compares to China at like 35%. And so the challenge is to kind of also figure out, right, based on your ever-changing consumer, what are the kind of right locations that they want to visit in terms of dining? Is it kind of quick serve? Is it, something more than that? And I think that it's really interesting in terms of when someone now goes to the mall, are they thinking about being there all day, right? Is this an all day out adventure with the family, right? Is this kind of time together? Or is it just kind of, we're going to kind of, jump in and, we're just looking for a blue shirt, right? And I think the other thing to think about, Ethan, is that this idea now, right, this mall as a platform, as they start to think about micro fulfillment and micro distribution, right, how does this, kind of consumer change how they're engaging? And then how do the landlords also think about, future opportunities?
I mean, it's, and I'll kind of answer this in two parts because I want to touch on something you said before with this idea of like the pharmacy. If you think about what's going on, for example, at the Westfield Garden State Plaza, the addition of office and residential to the mix, all of a sudden a pharmacy makes a ton of sense because if my office or where I live is right next to the mall, why wouldn't I want to be there? Or different types of food options or gyms. And I think this changing idea of what malls include or even the immediate area includes is going to give a lot of opportunity. Brands like Industrious that are taking up mall spaces, these are really exciting potential changes that offer a much wider array of potential tenants for any given mall. But part of that tenant mix that's so interesting is kind of these rising product, digitally native brands that people are excited about. And, we've talked about the decline of department stores, though, to be fair, there is some really interesting data that even that decline might not look as bad as we might have expected. But you think about, we had a conversation with the CEO of Neighborhood Goods, and he was saying that they view themselves, even as kind of this new age department store, as maybe a place where a brand can understand what offline means before they open up a physical store. And so this idea that more brands are going to have physical locations is really exciting, again, because it feeds into this same trend of more diversity, a much longer long tail of retailers that have physical locations, which ultimately means more differentiation in each location and therefore less direct competition. And I know we say this quite often, but in a lot of places in America, all of the malls were really similar. Yeah. And that meant everything was directly competing. But if I have one mall that has a very different array from the other mall, why not go to one weekend and another the next? And that could create a fundamentally different environment.
I mean, our belief at Coresight has been that the future of the mall is live streaming, and, physical is really important. So number one, there's a sustainability component. And as you're able to kind of, as a consumer, you can either see the product if you're buying it through a live stream, or if you go into the physical store, once again, you're trying it on. And so what we see is returns are about 50% lower when kind of buying from a live stream or in the physical environment. And with sustainability, really, I think at the tip of everybody's tongue, we think this will continue to grow. And I think that, what you saw on the last slide, right, this kind of department store versus specialty store debate, what we've seen in terms of the data is that when department stores sometimes exit a property, that the overall sales per foot increase because you don't have this aggressive discounting. And so it ends up being, right, you as a consumer feel like you're not getting what somebody else didn't want, right? When something is 60, 70, 80 off, you're getting something that everybody wants, right? If it's on like a 20 or 30% off. And so there is this kind of, I would say, inherent, kind of focus on, oh my goodness, I need to buy it now, right? Before it's gone, right? They get it before it's gone, which we just haven't really seen that. And so I think that, that's really critical. And then I think as we look at this slide, I think it says that even much more so around this, there's been this concern, right, in terms of the hourglass. And, we'd seen this kind of narrowing of the middle, if you will. But I would say that this slide for sure shows us maybe a different story.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a narrative that we hear all the time, is this death of the middle. And then there was just a lot of activity in the last 6 to 12 months, even beyond, that made us kind of question it. And one of the elements that was really interesting was looking at the brands that many of these big box retailers are trying to bring inside. And so Target having Apple stores, or Casper, or Disney, Kohl's bringing in Sephora into locations. And what kept on striking us was that this isn't cheap. It's not value. It's not value the way we would think of Dollar General or Walmart or many of these other brands. And what's really interesting is seeing that this middle lane actually feels like it's strengthening. And it's being led by brands who really understand how to reach that middle. So they understand that, yes, value is part of the equation, but it's not the central component. It's about providing the goods that people want at prices that they're comfortable with, but not at the lowest possible price. And even the Target's just a perfect example, not just because they're good at so many things, but also because of this feeling of like Target, quote unquote, of, oh, it's kind of this upper level brand that provides all of these things even at value. And it does feel like it's having a real impact on the wider retail landscape. When you think of Dollar General launching Pop Shelf, when you think of Big Lots expanding their higher offerings or more expensive offerings, I think that this lane, plus the idea of what the pandemic meant from a merchandising perspective and the supply chain and raising prices and not having this race to the bottom anymore, it's going to have a really significant, potentially long-term impact that should strengthen the middle even more.
It's interesting. When I look at these retailers, what I think about is, they all have very strong loyalty programs, right? So they all have a voice with their customer. Number two, I think that, kind of what you talked about, whether it was, kind of Target or Kohl's and starting, they're almost serving as landlords now, right? Because they're bringing in, so the whole dynamic is really changing, and it's changing very quickly. And, there is this kind of power in some ways now that the retailers have, as they have more, right, with BOPUS and curbside and pickup. In some ways, they have a more direct relationship with the consumer, and they're also meeting those higher level of expectations with the consumer as well. I mean, it really is quite interesting. And, like I said, everything we're thinking about right now is how does this all kind of play out for back to school and holiday. And I think, even on this slide, right, Gap, Sephora, and Dollar General, right, just the data is really illustrating, just kind of the power with these like diverse formats, but also the relationships that they're building between the customer and themselves. And then also even within retail, like you said, with, with Sephora and, kind of some of the new relationships and new geographies that they'll be trending in.
Yeah, I mean, you're dead on. And it's one of the things that's really interesting is, and this is almost kind of the synthesis, excuse me, of some of the last few slides we've seen, what are malls going to look like? What this middle lane, how do we expand migration patterns? Is we have viewed a lot of things in a very simple perspective. And, we were guilty of this also, but looking at Gap, testing out outdoor formats and saying, uh-oh, what does that mean for malls? But I think a much more valuable perspective and actually instructive perspective is understanding a lot of these shifts within the lens of diversification. So Sephora going into a Kohl's, Sephora testing what an outdoor format would look like, moving away from just urban environments and malls, is about trying to understand how they can reach their customer in different places more effectively. And maybe one of the best brands at this was Lululemon. Lululemon would deploy large format stores that have an experiential component, and very nearby a small format store that was just about sales. And I think this perspective of how do we try different things, how do we have multiple formats, how do we reach different areas, is all about how do I reach different audiences with the right mix in the right way for them. And that's, as these brands land on what those options look like for them and what their ideal mix looks like, it should give them a more sustainable way of reaching more people through the channels they want to be met.
No, that's an excellent point. I want to address the poll because I think it's fascinating. So first question, and thanks, most of you participated, thank you. As a consumer in the post-ish, COVID-ish world, how are you going to look at that? Do you find yourself shopping online more, less, or the same as this time last year? So obviously this time last year, we were certainly all spending a bit more time indoors. And I actually think this is where a lot of the pundits were wrong, because the feeling was, right, the minute that everything opened up, people were going to just storm the barn, if you will. And what we've seen is that everyone's learned to shop in a new way. And so I think, number one, there's now this research component to shopping, right? I'm going to, spend more time before I buy, and I may want to go to the physical store to actually taste it, taste it, touch it, feel it, see it, right? So I make a better decision. But also, right, what we're seeing in, kind of, I'd say more of like a Dollar General, Target, right, where you have more consumables, right? You're adding trips, right? So you're still kind of going to the physical store as much as you were, but you're now shopping online more. And that, I think, has been very interesting. And what do you think are the long-term implications there?
I think that, we talk a lot about things that, it's omni-channel, right? So omni-channel for a long time meant, hey, we have physical stores, and now we're introducing all of these digital channels. And they are really significant pieces of the puzzle. So like you mentioned, I went into a store to buy, the shirt I'm actually wearing today. I went in a store, I tried on a polo from this brand. It was the right size. I loved it. I bought it. I then bought 6 others in different colors because I don't want to have to go look for another brand that has the size and fit that I'm looking for. And so it is a physical oriented original touch, but all of those digital touches are super important pieces of the process as well. And I think what's really interesting is that whereas we started with physical retail going into digital, and that's what omni-channel meant, we're actually seeing the flip side of that now. So digital has been more deepened. It's a clear part of how we do business. It's how we want to interact with a lot of brands. We want those options available to us. But one of the things that digital had that maybe offline didn't have was a lot of data to help explain all of the values it provides. It doesn't need to be the only touch. Impressions matter. Our social feeds matter for reaching people. We view it as part of our marketing as almost as much as we view it as just a sales play. We don't do that for physical locations. And I think it's limiting the way we view omni-channel ultimately. So even the idea of buy online, pick up in store being a digital purchase, it requires a physical location. We need to give stores credit for that. The idea of uplift and the marketing value. So if I'm in New York City and I walk into a store and I try something on, even if I don't buy, if I buy 6 more times online later in the year, is that valuable? Of course. That store had a huge impact. And it means we need to figure out, how do we measure the value that the stores provide us from a marketing perspective? How do we ensure that our salespeople are there to give me a great experience, even if I don't end up buying because of the long tail of my interaction? But then even things like returns, online returns are far more expensive than an in-store return, not even thinking about the potential for upsell once I return and I'm already in the location. Yet those numbers very often are taken away from the sales per square foot numbers of a physical location, which is silly. And so I think we need to expand our understanding of omnichannel, giving digital channels all of the value and all of the lauding that they deserve, but doing the same for physical as well.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that, as we see, the consumer continuing to evolve, and I think this slide says it best in terms of, right, this power of routine. I mean, hey, we've all set up kind of new routines, and some of it is also, Ethan, I think what you kind of talked about earlier, which was like this back to the future, right? Are we, if we think about how we behaved a year ago, how are we kind of continuing to, whether it's time of day we're shopping or how we're shopping, what of those have been kind of ingested and will be kind of part of our longer term shopping patterns? And one of those were just kind of a pandemic behavior. I mean, how are you looking at this when you kind of think about this power of routine?
So we were pretty confident that there were going to be some really significant shifts in consumer behavior as the recovery happened. We've been really surprised to see that there haven't been all that many. Time of visit, the visit duration has gone back, so this whole mission-driven shopping trend went away, but that was fairly expected. One of the things that we did think was going to catch was, because of the flexibility enabled by work from home, we thought we were going to see, more morning visits at grocery stores, or more shopping during the week because, hey, I can start at 10 o'clock and work a little bit later because I don't need to commute at, at your local Kohl's or Marshall's. And we haven't really seen that. We actually see that the shopping patterns look far more like pre-COVID than they do like any period during COVID. And it's coming back more and more over time. I do think the caveat here is that There are small shifts that could have big opportunities. So we talk about this a lot in terms of like Starbucks or Panera. If we are working from home 1 or 2 days a week, the idea that my local coffee place could be an area where I can get out of the house and do a few hours of work. And then for Starbucks, it's great because 2 to 3 p.m. is not their strongest time. And I'm going to have a bigger ticket size because I feel guilty because I'm sitting in the store for 2 hours and I'll get a coffee plus a Danish plus maybe another coffee. So there are all these other kind of, even if they're small, potentially large opportunities for these brands. But overall, I think what we're learning is that our routines dictate a lot. So if we're going into the office, if we're dropping our kids off at school, if we're doing all these things that we were doing that has a huge influence over maybe a lot of the things that we saw during the pandemic.
Can I ask you a question? There's been this thesis that the consumer, while they may not want to return to the office due to duration of commute or other reasons, that they might want to work from their local mall. And so that we might see whether any one of a number of kind of opportunities for them to kind of hot desk or whatnot. What do you think about that? And we've talked about it with just many different people in the ecosystem. How do you think that plays out? Do you think that we see that anywhere? Was that just kind of a thought, a fleeting thought? Or do you think there's something longer term there, especially as we think about mixed use in the future?
I think it depends on the sector. I think what we're going to see is that sectors where talent that is in less high demand is going to be coming back to the office quite a bit, because to get that job, you're going to have less overtime. By the way, this is not the next 6 months, but a little bit longer than that. You're going to, when you're getting that first job out of school, you're probably going to need to live near the office. And it's going to be this expectation that you're there quite a bit. And I think businesses want that because they want to kind of deepen their culture and teach younger people how to be part of it. But if you're in a sector that has a lot of demand and there's not enough people, you're going to have a lot of control. And I think, high-tech companies that are looking for developers and there's just not enough of them, if you're a developer today, you're going to be able to say, I want to work remotely. I don't want to work from the office more than 2 days a week. And they're going to say yes, because there's just not enough of you. And so you're in a powerful position. There's a really cool startup called Anywhere that's basically trying to do exactly that. How do I make it so that a company can have a better level of control over where people work? And how do I ensure that people can go work from a coffee shop or the local co-working space or somewhere else? So I do think there's going to be a huge opportunity with kind of this hot desk phenomenon, especially not in kind of the central hub office. But at the same time, I don't think that this hard shift to work from home is going to be as big as sometimes we make it seem.
I think you're absolutely right. We should let's look at some of the industries. I know we've got some really interesting data here. I mean, it's I think that on the grocery side, there had been this expectation that online grocery was going to kind of go back to where it was, and we were going to see this kind of just everything return to physical store. I think what we've just seen is similar to what we've seen with like Dollar General and Target, right? There's just more visits overall. And so whether it's kind of online, because number one, there's many reasons behind it, but I do think that what we're seeing is this consumer, once again, consuming closer to need, and also knowing that they can now, right? They don't need to go for like that huge stock up trip like once a month or once a week. They can also have product delivered in an hour or two or even 30 minutes. And, so you don't have to have like 5 bags of sugar, because if you run out, right, you can, borrow from a neighbor, or you can, have one delivered in 30 minutes. And so I feel like this, to me, and changes right? It's why I've always been so passionate about the grocery sector, is because changes show up here first. Number one, because of the number of visits, and number two, just in terms of, the product that's being sold. I mean, as you look at this and you're, kind of comparing to 2019, what have been the biggest surprises to you?
So I think there's a few. One, there were brands that we felt were really strong pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now they're strong post-pandemic. And that's like Publix and Albertsons and even Kroger. I think there were some that we thought were getting hit really hard during the pandemic. So the Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. And so one of the big surprises for me is still Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's has not been great in their terms of their digital offering. They were kind of late to that party in a really significant way. They saw their visits plunge early on in the pandemic, yet as things have increasingly opened up, their visits are coming roaring back, and they are up, 2.8% in April compared to April 2019, up 6.8% in May compared to 2019. Those are incredible numbers considering they didn't really embrace kind of digital. And, you look at a brand like HEB that got hit in a time when, proximity became a primary factor as opposed to maybe going to the brand you love, and they're recovering incredibly well. So I think what we're learning is that the focus that some brands have placed on creating a loyal, dedicated consumer base, on really trying to delight the customer, that has a far bigger long-term impact than almost anything else, especially in grocery. And it just goes back to the old school fundamentals. If you keep your customer really happy, they're going to keep on coming back because they appreciate the experience.
Well, this is really interesting. I mean, we've seen, right, we've all spent a lot more time than I think any of us had ever expected at home. And, so, I mean, it's like, that hole, that window shade, right? I mean, we've all kind of spent more time like thinking about our home and the items in it. What's interesting is I think this data is fascinating, and it is inconsistent with what we're seeing in like the furniture market, which is still insanely strong. And so I really want to ask you, right, how do you kind of juxtapose the two? I mean, were these all kind of like quick fixes and we got those all done, and the furniture is, kind of a bigger investment, more research? Why are we seeing these numbers?
I think it's context. So, home improvement had this crazy surge last year, and you can see in the graph that's kind of more to the top, that's year-over-year numbers. And that's where you see those declines for the first time in forever for Home Depot and Lowe's. But when you look at the 2019 comp, they're still way up. And I think what we need to remember is that they surged so far beyond what could possibly been expected that even these declines, they're not real declines. They're still incredible strength. The furnishing sector just got started a bit later. So their kind of rise, because a lot of these brands weren't essential retail status, really kicked off in May, June, July. And so it'll be interesting to see if we see similar declines in that sector in those same months. But again, context here is key. The same way we looked at brands during COVID and said, they're not weak. Even if they have, in visit declines, it's not because of anything real. They're still super strong. And this is just people shopping less frequently. We need to have the context for the really overperforming brands too. And that's going to be the home improvement players. It's going to be players like At Home, Floor and Decor, because the numbers they hit last year were just so insane that it's almost impossible for them to sustain them. If they do sustain them, it's incredible. But even if they don't, they're performing so much higher than the level they were at recently that we need to keep that in mind.
Ethan, I know we have a lot more slides. We also have a lot of questions, so maybe I'll drop a few in here.
Please.
Will brands turn into personalization instead of fast fashion production?
Ooh, I don't know. It depends on what you mean by the word production. I think personalization is going to be a big piece, especially in that luxury tier. I think it'll be a big part of the puzzle for digitally native brands that have a really strong digital presence and really understand how to segment audiences and interact with them. But that's what we want. So imagine, how do you carry the in-store experience to online, the online experience to the store? That's the level of personalization that we're looking for, so that I can try on a shirt in a location and they're going to know that when I sign on, or have this updated profile that allows me to benefit from that visit to the store fully. I think those are the areas where you want to see brands succeed more, because whoever cracks that code, there's a huge upside to leveraging digital to improve the offline experience, and the offline experience to improve digital.
So this is a question that I have been obsessed with for a good let's call it 6-7 years. Can the speakers, thanks Denise, can the speakers share any perspective on the potential impact of the shifting retail trends on the cannabis market?
So I've been looking at the cannabis technology sector a lot, but this was my interaction with it has always been on the technology side. So brands that are looking to enhance the amount you can grow, to help isolate for what you can grow. I think there's obviously a huge opportunity in this space because of those core technologies. I still think we're a little early, and apart from like a huge regulatory shift, we're still probably in the early days of it. But when it kicks off, it's going to kick off in a really big way. And I think you're already seeing the number of startups that are having CBD-based products. That's only going to increase. And what's interesting is a lot of these brands are really focused on offline as well. And part of it's to establish legitimacy, to overcome some of the classic negative conceptions that have gone with that space.
I think the physical, I mean, it was interesting. I spoke at an ICSC conference, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years ago, and it just happened to be in Denver. So it was kind of the right topic, right location. And my belief has always been that there is an experiential aspect to, kind of visiting a dispensary. You want to kind of meet the people. And with, some of these malls having, higher vacancy rates than they would have in, other years, that, I'm not necessarily saying that CBD is going to save the day, but I think it certainly could have a big impact in terms of traffic to malls, in terms of, kind of bringing in a new customer, other services you could offer to them. And so I think we're going to see the landscape shift pretty dramatically. I mean, the landlords will have to decide kind of how that, right? Do they have like a, as they've always kind of grouped like with like, what does that look like? But I think there's a huge opportunity ahead, and I think it's just barely been scratched.
Agreed.
All right, let's talk about apparel.
So, I mean, apparel is fascinating, and it's one of the things that's been really interesting for us is, we talked about some of these brands that are doing well, and not huge surprises there. But then there's players like Macy's and even Bloomingdale's that we've been looking at their data recently, and they're doing surprisingly well for brands that we had largely written off as part of, it's nothing but doom and gloom for the department sector. And while it's very clear that there needs to be an evolution there, and they need to think differently about their spaces, I think some of them are, or at least are trying. But even more, we can't overlook the brand equity they have. So while changes are needed, it's much easier for a brand to make changes when they already have an existing brand than it is for someone else to come in new and kind of take over the scene and create that level of awareness that these players have been, developing for decades.
I also think if you look at many of the brands that are on this slide, they're very much embracing these indie brands, emerging tech. And, their stores are almost these kind of living laboratories. And I think the consumer is paying attention. And I think that's some of the reason you're seeing the numbers that you are. And, in some ways, right, the pandemic gave them the, if you will, runway to try things that they had always thought might work. They just, in some cases weren't sure that was the best use of their resources. But I've been impressed as well with the space, the results that we're seeing. And I think especially as we move to more of it's called a fuller price model, where it's not, the only reason you're visiting isn't because you get 60% off in the department store and you get 20% off in like inline retail. There's a whole kind of like discovery. And I think it makes the sector incredibly interesting.
I agree with you. I think maybe it's one of the least discussed points is that I think that, forget us as consumers learning this, a lot of these brands are realizing that it's not the fact that it's 60% off or 50% off or 80% off that's drawing the customer. It's the discovery process. And the more they embrace the fact that, hey, I'm leaning on you to help me find the things that I want, that's where you start kind of owning where this evolution likely should be going. And so to call back, I know we have a deep love for this brand, but looking at like neighborhood goods, you don't just resonate with the brands that they're bringing on, you resonate with neighborhood goods because you trust them to help you find those brands. That's what Macy's needs to grab. That's what Bloomingdale's needs to grab, and more. It's that I trust you to have the brands in there that I want to find. And I think that the more they really embrace that, the more exciting things are going to be for the department sector.
Well, I think that this says it all for neighborhood goods, right? When the product that you're selling is branded neighborhood goods, and that's what you're having one of the greatest challenges keeping in stock, right? That's where you can tell, right? The consumer is there like voting right with you. So I think this is interesting as well, because if we think about, some of the innovation that's happened in the, kind of big box retail, and, whether it was curbside or pickup or BOPUS, whether it was payments or loyalty, I do think that and just even in some cases, changing the consumer that they're addressing or rolling out new formats, it really has been pretty impressive. And, there are certainly some retailers here who've had kind of greater spikes, but there's not any reason, I don't think, why they all can't, right?
Oh, completely. And I think the big reason is, and these brands live in the quote unquote nice to have. We talk about this a lot of like, is our products, our innovations necessary, or are they nice to have? And I think the reason these brands are succeeding is because they're ahead of the curve. So Target was working on buy online, pick up in store, and Walmart was working on it, and delivery and all of these components far before it was an absolute necessity. And that's why, as it becomes a necessity, they're so well positioned. And I think the exciting thing, the reason we include Dollar General in this kind of rarefied air, is because they're doing similar things. They're trying out new concepts. They're being aggressive. And that type of innovative perspective, what's going to allow you to be positioned when these new trends come. I love the Walmart kind of Jet interaction as a great example of this. I don't think Jet was the most successful acquisition of all time in that Jet becoming a part of Walmart's kind of offering. But the impact it had on the way Walmart viewed their own e-commerce was huge, and it helped the brand push forward in a really significant way. These players are succeeding because of the work that they've done. It's not happenstance. It's not just good positioning. They've positioned themselves, and it's why I think you see them succeed pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, and there's no reason, I think it would be silly to bet against them for years to come.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the kind of key components here is just, as the kind of consumer is looking to have this like seamless integration of payment, physical and digital, and what that means going forward. One of the questions that you and I have talked about a lot, kind of offline, is how do you value the store, right? And I actually thought your kind of personal description around buying the shirt you have on, and then, right, you bought it in the store kind of influenced your purchase, but then you bought 6 more not in a store. How does in some way the store get credit for that? And how do we assign like the value to the store?
I think it requires a lot of change, and it's what's interesting is the more it starts with proving out the case, and this is where obviously we're biased in this, but this is where data becomes such a big piece of the puzzle of making sure we find objective, hard metrics that can show the values that are being provided. But it's going to shift into even how we compensate, how we train staff. We were speaking to a large retailer, to their stores team at the end of April, and one of the things we said is, you need to start understanding, or not start understanding, but you need to have the company value the fact that your interaction with someone matters a lot. If you have a great experience in a store and buy nothing, it doesn't mean that that experience had no impact. Because if you buy it later online, or if you get it something as a gift, just because it's not as linear as I had a nice experience, I bought something on that same visit, doesn't mean it's not happening. But it's going to take a deep embrace of data, and brands that are willing to kind of go away from traditional models of training staff and how we value staff and how we compensate staff to ensure that the omni-channel experience is maximized.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, and it goes back to what we're seeing with live streaming. Many retailers are starting to compensate staff with like days off or gift cards, and so to me it's this goes back to, it's, yes, in some ways you're getting paid, but it's more because you have an affinity for the brand. And so that, I think, is, so when you're hiring talent, right, these are people who truly love your brand and want to be, influencers, KOLs, and they can have a completely different impact on your brand than maybe sales associates, kind of pre-live streaming.
Absolutely.
Well, this definitely, if we think about how we all kind of, figured out how much more time we could spend in like our local drugstore and like what could actually be purchased there. I will say there were certainly some days during the, kind of crisis, I was probably in the drugstore with my dogs like every day, because it's like you just wanted to get out. And I was like, wow, who knew that they sold all of, right? I can buy a shirt, I can buy pants, I can get slippers, right? You can get like truly everything. And so there's the like higher margin products, and then there's the consumables. And I think that they all learned that Walgreens has had this huge push into fresh. We saw them kind of even if you will get double down on that. And I think that this idea that the pharmacist is the most trusted person that we kind of cross paths with, even more so than clergy. And so they started to take on a different role in our lives. And I think that some of that will be very long lasting. And just the pharmacist almost is like your confidant. Maybe they are opining on buying the blue t-shirt or the red one, I don't know. But I do think that this data to me is some of the most interesting.
Oh, I think I think you're absolutely right. And you think there's other trends that are supporting this. So, CVS launched their health hubs in 2019. They're going to have 1,500 locations. Well, you'll go for like basic treatments in the middle of the day. That's not going to deepen that relationship. Of course it will. The idea of at-home medicine. So products like Tyto, which is the ability to do a full kind of medical exam from the home. That's not going to deepen the interaction with that kind of pharmacy, because I don't have to go to the doctor's office for everything. I can just have that quick visit and then go get the thing I need from my local pharmacy. I think there's a lot of trends that are pushing in this direction, but you kind of hit it on the head. I don't know if I've never walked into a CVS with the goal of buying one thing and not left with 17 other things that I didn't realize I was going to get. And that's a really special part of the experience. And that you combine that with lots more reasons to go. And yeah, you're going to see a lot of success. And I do think these are, CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, we'll see they're a little bit more urban based, plus the closures. I think we're going to see those brands do really well for quite a while. And this long tail of our perspective on health and wellness is only going to buoy that further.
No, I agree. And I know, Ethan, we are like out of time, and I apologize to everyone's questions we didn't get to. I think we need to have a whole kind of conversation just answering the questions, because there are some really very interesting ones that came in, especially around, kind of the integration between tech and retail. What does kind of like C to M to C look like, and sustainability. So Ethan and I will do our best to follow up individually and together at the same time. And then, maybe we'll invite Ethan back just to answer questions. But thank you all. Ethan, as always, I have more questions than when we started, which is, I think, your ability with the data to provoke thought and insights, and also kind of questioning what's next, as opposed to kind of what's happened today. And then the sector breakdown and how differently we're seeing, right, whether it's furniture or home improvement or grocery or apparel or pharmacy, it does give everyone, as we saw from all the questions, room to pause. And I can't thank you enough. I mean, you truly help the entire industry think differently in a very positive way about what's possible. And, we just want to thank you for being here with us today, and for all the value you provide.
Well, it means a lot from anyone. It means even more from you. And it's truly a pleasure to be here. And, just like you said, if anyone has any questions, I'm at ethan@placer.ai. Feel free to email them over. We love, you can see how much fun we were having. This is a labor of love. And so, always happy to continue those conversations.
Great. Thanks, Ethan. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Deborah. Bye.
Bye-bye.